We hear them long before we see them. That high, piercing shriek that cuts through the fog of the Shire, freezing the blood of armies and making even the bravest warriors drop their swords in absolute, paralyzing terror. We know them as the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths, the Black Riders, faceless, immortal terrors, wrapped in black cloaks, serving the Dark Lord without question or hesitation. But listen very closely to that scream the next time you watch the films or read the books. It is not the sound of a monster born in the dark pits of Mordor. It is the sound of absolute, unending human agony. It is the scream of men who have been trapped in a claustrophobic nightmare of their own making for over 4,000 years. Welcome back to the Lore Companion. Today, we are stripping away the black cloaks. We are not looking at the Nazgûl as villains today. We are looking at them as the greatest psychological tragedy in fantasy literature. Because to truly understand the Ringwraiths, you have to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth. They did not start as monsters. They were great men. They were kings, scholars, sorcerers, and warriors of ancient times. And their fall was not a sudden, dramatic plunge into darkness. It was a slow, suffocating drowning in their own human desires. To understand the corruption of the Nine, we must first understand the central, driving tragedy of humanity in J.R.R. Tolkien's universe, which mirrors the deepest anxiety of our own real world, the absolute terror of mortality, the fear of death. In the cosmology of Middle-earth, death was not originally a curse. It was explicitly called the gift of men, bestowed upon them by the supreme creator, Eru Ilúvatar. Elves are biologically tied to the world. As long as the earth lasts, they must carry the burden of thousands of years of memory and sorrow. But humans are not bound to the physical realm. When they die, their souls leave the circles of the world entirely, moving on to a mystery even the gods do not understand. But over thousands of years, the first Dark Lord, Morgoth, poisoned the minds of men. He taught them to view the gift as a curse. He taught them to look into the unknown dark and feel dread. By the Second Age, this fear had grown into a continental obsession. Look at the great human empire of Númenor, a civilization of unparalleled majesty and technological advancement. In their final centuries, they stopped exploring the stars and started building elaborate, colossal tombs. The entire culture became a death cult, obsessed with embalming, preserving, and finding ways to artificially prolong their lifespans. They conquered the fear of their enemies, they conquered the seas, but they could not conquer the terrifying fragility of their own bodies. We see this in our own history, from the first emperor of China, drinking fatal mercury, believing it was an elixir of life, to modern billionaires investing fortunes into transhumanism and age reversal. Humanity has always been terrified of the clock. And Sauron, who is arguably the greatest psychological manipulator in all of fiction, saw this profound existential terror. When he approached the Nine Kings, he didn't offer them vast armies or weapons of mass destruction. He offered them the one thing a dying man will trade his soul for: time. He gave them 9 rings of power. But here is the most insidious, brilliant part of the trap. The rings did not immediately turn them evil. This was not a magical switch being flipped where they suddenly started worshipping Sauron. It was a Faustian bargain, a slow, intoxicating poison masked as a divine blessing. Imagine you are one of these kings. Perhaps you are a powerful lord of Númenor, or a great chieftain of the Easterlings, like Camul, the only wraith Tolkien ever actually named. You put on the ring. At first, you only experience miracles. Your mind sharpens to a razor's edge. You can perceive the hidden thoughts of your enemies and advisors. Your kingdom prospers under your enhanced wisdom. You amass unimaginable wealth. And most importantly, you look in the mirror and you realize you have stopped aging. Decades pass. Your political rivals wither and die. Your children grow old, but you remain in the absolute prime of your life, sitting on your throne, practically a living god among your people. But the rings were forged with a hidden mechanism. They were metaphysical anchors, tethering a mortal soul to a physical world it was biologically and spiritually never meant to inhabit forever. Tolkien explicitly writes that a mortal who keeps one of the great rings does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues. He stretches. Bilbo Baggins described it perfectly, like butter scraped over too much bread. Their lives were stretched incredibly thin. The physical human body and the human psyche were not designed to process thousands of years of existence. Slowly, the golden age of these kings turned to ash. The corruption began not with madness, but with the amplification of their base traits. A just king's desire to protect his people warped into extreme paranoia and brutal tyranny. A sorcerer's thirst for knowledge twisted into dark, forbidden necromancy. Their kingdoms likely became dystopias, ruled by immortal autocrats who saw every new generation not as their children, but as potential threats to their eternal rule. Then came the second, far more horrifying phase of the trap, the fading. The rings pull their wearers into what Tolkien calls the unseen realm. This is the spectral, ghostly world where beings like Sauron and the High Elves exist in their true spiritual power. But humans are not meant to be there. Because they were being pulled into the unseen, the physical bodies of the Nine began to lose their substance in the real world. Imagine the psychological horror of this sensory deprivation. You wake up one day and realize you can no longer feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. Food tastes like ash. You try to hold your loved ones, but your hands are becoming cold, numb, and insubstantial. You look in the mirror, and your reflection is becoming translucent. You are becoming a ghost while you are still breathing. You try to take the ring off, but you can't. The addiction is absolute, baked into your very soul. And even if you could find the willpower, the terror stops you. Because to remove the ring is to invite the thousands of years of death you have cheated to catch up with you in a single, crushing moment. So, they kept them on. They sat in their dark palaces, watching their kingdoms crumble or turn into cults of terror. They watched everyone they ever knew turn to dust. Until one day, the physical body was entirely consumed. The kings were gone. Only the wraiths remained. Invisible to mortal eyes, existing only in the cold twilight of the unseen realm, clothed in black garments given to them by Sauron, just so they could have a shape to interact with the physical world. They became a pure extension of Sauron's will. They had no independent thought, no rebellion, no desires left in them. When Sauron felt anger, they felt anger. When Sauron commanded, they moved. The great, proud kings who accepted the rings to ensure their eternal freedom and power became the ultimate, eternal slaves. It is no coincidence that Tolkien fought in the trenches of the First World War. He saw firsthand what happens to men who are subjected to unrelenting, unending trauma. The shell shock, the hollow eyes. Men who survived the artillery but lost their souls, wandering the earth like ghosts of who they used to be. The Nazgûl are the fantasy embodiment of that trauma. Their greatest weapon on the battlefield is the Black Breath, a wave of despair so profound it stops hearts. But this despair isn't just magic. It is their own internal, bottomless misery, an existential dread projected outward onto their enemies. They are weaponized depression. The tragedy of the Nazgûl is the ultimate warning about the human pursuit of absolute control and the fear of our own natural limits. They sought to cheat the fundamental laws of the universe, to become gods over their own destiny, and in doing so, they lost the very thing that made life worth living. When you see the Witch King of Angmar hovering over the Pelennor fields, do not just see a terrifying, badass villain. See a man who loved his life so desperately, so obsessively, that he accidentally sold his soul to keep it, only to completely forget what it meant to be alive. Which of the nine do you think had the most tragic realization of what they were becoming? Do you think Camul or the Númenorian lords tried to fight Sauron's mental control before they completely faded into the unseen realm? Tell me your theories and psychological breakdowns in the comments below. If you want to keep exploring the hidden, darker depths of this lore, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep reading between the lines.